All right. According to this, we are live. Let's just see here if the audience agrees with that. Where is the comments? Here we go. All right. Can you guys hear us out there? Let me know.
Hey, y'all.
Okay. Yeah. Looks like it's on. Yeah. It's definitely started. Okay.
Am I audible?
Hello, everyone. This is the RPG Pundit, the final boss and internet shitlords. And this is the RPG Pundit Encounter. In today's episode 5 of the Pundit Encounter, I have a kind of a living legend of the RPG design hobby. And we're going to have a large number of questions for him tonight, and you guys can join in too. If you've got questions for Sandy Petersen, the creator, well, one of the creators, I guess, of Call of Cthulhu and a number of other products for Chaosium and many other projects besides that. We're going to be talking about him in a second here, but while we're waiting for some of the stragglers to catch up, I guess I should introduce you first to our other co-host, who you can see back here. So, as you know, in November, Meatball passed away, and after that, I spent a while doing some repair work on my house. But I knew I was going to get another cat, and at the beginning of the month, I was informed by one of the gamers in my Last Sun campaign. He knew a woman who had kittens to give away, and this is a very interesting case because, hey, where did you go? Come on. There she is. Because she had found a garbage bag right by the dumpster that had 3 newborn kittens in it, and she rescued them, and for 2 months she took care of them, and she was then looking for homes for them, and so I thought that was a very good cause, and here we are. So this is the new cat. But you've seen, those of you who follow my posts, my community posts on YouTube, or some of my posts on X, have already seen the photo. And some of you have been wondering what her name is going to be. Well, I've decided her name is Domino. And part of the reason about that, you can't quite tell right now, but she has these, what looks like as if she's wearing a little mask around her eyes with the streaks that go from either side of the eyes. But the other one is just that she is an incredibly lucky cat, right? Because she was marked for death. There she is. She was marked for death, and yet she was saved by the kindness of a person. And now she's lucky enough to become a YouTube star. So that's quite the rags to riches story for her. I'm not a big, all of you know probably, or most of you who follow me anyways, the ones that aren't just here because of Sandy, know that I'm a strange kind of nerd because I don't really play video games or German board games or Warhammer or any of that stuff, but I do like certain gambling games, and Domino, if you've ever played real dominoes, just to say Domino 5, that's a game that it has, half of it is entirely luck and the other half is very careful strategy. And I think that she's a very clever cat from what I've seen so far, but she's also clearly been very lucky. So there you go. That's the new kitten, and I'm sure you'll be seeing a lot of pictures of her as time goes by, and no doubt she'll soon be interrupting my regular videos too, just like Meatball used to. So okay, we have with us here Sandy Petersen. We're at 37. Wow. Oh, there we go. Got a good turnout. And Domino has gone off to explore the rest of my place now. So basically, I'll mention for everyone that you know, as you guys know, I don't put monetization during the live streams. So obviously, if any of you want to contribute to the cat food fund, feel free to give a super chat. Unlike a lot of other live streams, I don't do this thing, which I've seen a lot of other live streams do, where only people who give super chats will have it read out loud, right? I will, if I find something in the chat that I find interesting, I will definitely put it on. Oh, she's climbing up my leg. I will definitely put it on. But obviously, if you do a super chat, I'll have to read it out, unless it's something that's going to get me demonetized or something like that. Yeah. Get back up there. There you go. All right. So with that said, we're gonna start out here, and there are a couple of there's a traditional first question and a traditional last question in the pundit encounter. So the first one, for the first question, Sandy, you've had a very long career in RPGs, and I know all people
saying I'm old.
Sorry?
That's such a nice way of saying I'm old.
Yeah, it's true. Oh, by the way, guys, we're having a little bit of an issue with Sandy's. I don't know. Let me know if you can hear him clearly or not, because he's got a microphone and he tries to raise the input and then it goes back down again automatically somehow. We have no idea how to fix that because both of us are kind of techno illiterates. So if anyone has a suggestion, please do so. But yeah, you've been around a long time. You've interacted with pretty much, I guess, everybody in the RPG field, and so this question is much more relevant to you than to some of my other some of the other people I've interviewed who've been around less time. The first question I always like to ask is, who in the hobby has been good to you and who has been bad to you? And you can feel free to answer that how you like.
The RPG hobby.
Yeah.
Okay, the person who was the very best to me was Greg Stafford, founder of Chaosium, now sadly passed away these few years. He was the guy that really got me my start in as a professional game designer. So he is my hero. And no one's been super mean to me. I mean, there's been mean guys in the hobby, but they haven't usually come down on me personally, if you know what I mean. I don't have
There's no one you want to burn right now, is that right?
Well, I mean, I could complain about the Bloom brothers, you know, or how Critical Role dropped us or something, but you know, they were good to us before they were bad to us. So you know, and the Blooms, like I said, they did dirt to friends of mine, but not to me.
Yeah.
Well, I guess they did dirt to me with the Fritz Leiber Lankmar thing. So that was too bad. You heard that story?
Well, why don't you tell it to our audience?
So Fritz Leiber is an awesome author, and among other things, he wrote a fantasy series about these two guys, Fafhrd and the Grey
Legendary.
Legendary. Yeah. And Fafhrd was like this huge blonde barbarian, like a million other huge blonde barbarians, and the Grey Mouser was a civilized thiefly guy with a long, thin rapier. And the
archetypal rogue. Yeah.
Oh, I know. The playoff between these two characters was fabulous. Anyway, so TSR did a board game based on Lankmar, which was fine. And then later on, their board game went out of print. And Greg Stafford or Chaosium, when I was there, we went and we got the rights to Fritz Leiber's Lankmar universe. We went to his, and we did it the proper. We went through his agent, like you do, okay. And we got the rights. We also at that time had the rights to Michael Moorcock's, like Stormbringer, and Lovecraft stuff. Now you don't have to get rights to Lovecraft stuff anymore because it's now public domain, but it wasn't then. Okay. Anyway, so you don't have to get the rights to certain Lovecraft things, like the Brian Lumley stuff or J. Ramsey Campbell's, but Lovecraft's original stuff is public domain. Anyway, that's beside the point. We have the rights to this. TSR publishes a bunch of Lankmar stuff, and then they announced they're going to do some Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser role-playing stuff. So this is in the years of Brian and Kevin Bloom, okay? And so I'm there. Greg calls them up and says, "Hey, what's this about you doing Farford and the Grimouser? Because we have a signed contract with Fritz Leiber, with Fritz Leiber's agent, that we have the rights." And I don't remember which Bloom it was, so I'm not going to try to guess a name. One of them, and the guy says, well, apparently what they'd done, they had collared Fritz Leiber himself literally in a bar. And at this time, Fritz Leiber was like a functioning alcoholic.
Yeah.
Okay. Still a great writer, but he drank a lot. And they'd gotten him to sign the contract, and Fritz either forgot or didn't know or didn't realize what he was doing, and he signed, so that he had two conflicting contracts. The one that we had done with the agent, which had priority, and then the one that the Blooms had signed with the drunk Fritz Leiber in a bar. Okay. And Greg says, well, we have priority, and the Blooms say, well, we have we're going to do the game because we have this contract. And then the Blooms explained to Greg in great detail how he could screw over Fritz Leiber and get lots of money out of him for signing two contracts. You can get millions from this guy. You can really screw him over, and because we're not going to give up ours, and because we have the right here to have the contract. So Greg hangs up the phone, and he looks at me and he says, "Fritz Leiber's my hero. I would never hurt him." And he voluntarily gave up all our rights under the contract, so that the could keep it, because they weren't going to give up theirs, and we didn't want to hurt Fritz, and so that's what we did.
Yeah, that's all.
And that wasn't my decision. That was Greg Stafford, but he was the guy.
Yeah, and that was I know the box set that they eventually did. I had it when I was young, and it was good, but it wasn't great. I think that sadly it meant that there wasn't a really top level Lankmar book that actually came out for RPGs until Dungeon Crawl Classics did their Lankmar stuff, which is I think closer to the original style of Weaver.
Well, I don't know if the Blooms even never did much with it. They just had it, They also liked not having, because the deal, I don't know if the original Deities and Demigods, of course, it had Lankmar and it had Elric and it had all that stuff. That's and so we contacted, and they couldn't wiggle out of the Elric and the Lovecraft stuff. They were caught red-handed with that. They didn't have even the fake contract idea, right? And so we said, here's what we told them. We said, we love the idea of people being able to play D&D with Lovecraft and Elric. And so we will give you permission to keep this in print. And you don't have to pay us a cent. Okay? But what we do require from you is, first, we have to have a special thanks to in the credits of the Deities and Demigod, just like on the front page somewhere. Just like one special thanks to Chaosium Incorporated for use of these. And the other thing was they had to let us put D&D into our Thieves World box, which they did. And then what they did so we got Thieves World out, and then Deities and Demigods, what happened is they did a second edition that had the thanks to, and then they did a third printing where they took out the stuff, but they left the thanks to in. So I'm not sure what's going on with that. And then every edition after that, they just took out they just left off the thanks to and the stuff. So I don't see how that helped gamers at all. They didn't have to pay us or anything. We weren't being hard-nosed about it. We just said, say thanks to us and keep printing it. We love Arrow Lotus's art. We love
the whole history of
chaotic evil.
The whole history of D&D, official D&D, has been a history of mismanagement, pretty much. So that's not surprising. But as for Leiber, I mean, a lot of people who read kind of the now 20th century classic fantasy will be, kind of either a Conan person or a Lovecraft person or the there are some that are an Elric person, but for me, Lankhmar was my favorite. Like it just hit the perfect vibe for what I think that kind of fantasy should be. And it had just the right level of like real weirdness when it came to like things like the magic and the gods of Lankhmar and all that stuff. Is just brilliant stuff.
Well, so my original like encounter with the with that kind of fiction was actually Edgar Rice Burroughs. I was reading the Mars books and the Tarzan books, and the Venus books, and At the Earth's Core and all that stuff. And that didn't have magic exactly, but man, that's what got me into it. I think the next fantasy thing I read after Edgar Rice Burroughs was there was Otis Adelbert Klein, who was like an Edgar Rice Burroughs knockoff. But then I started reading Robert E. Howard, actually, Conan books, because they were coming out about the time I was in high school. And of course, if you're a high school kid all full of testosterone and frustration, Conan books are absolutely in your wheelhouse.
That's true. So as for Greg Stafford, I had, before he passed away, I had some email interactions with him over the years. If you're familiar with like my games, my products are largely like medieval authentic games, which is to say that it's an OSR products, but they try to much more directly replicate medieval legend, medieval myths, medieval history, and all of that stuff in a way that makes it a fairly different game from your standard D&D. And of course,
sort of like a non-plagiarized version of Chivalry and Sorcery.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. In a way. Although, like, Chivalry and Sorcery, it wasn't bad, but there was also, you could tell that there was a bit of amateur scholarship there, right? But anyway.
No, they stole entire sections of the text from textbooks and
that's right. Yeah. Curiously, I also knew the guy who did what was his name, Zimbalist, the guy that did Chivalry and Sorcery, because he was from like my neck of the woods where I was growing up in Alberta, right, in Canada. It was something about Canadians or Albertans rather, and myths and legends, right? 'Cause right around that time, there was Zimbalist, there was me, there was Jordan Peterson. We were all in the same place at the time. No, with Greg, like I was very. This was actually before I published Lion and Dragon, right? But I was always fascinated by his Pendragon, because he was so authentic to the legend, and it was
to the legend, not to the reality. He was reading the Vulgate and the all that.
He was reading. He had studied very carefully all of the different layers of the Arthurian legend, and so even though my Lion and Dragon is much more. It's not focused on those kind of the epic cycles, and instead is trying to be more about it's based more on first of all the real medieval history, like I did with Lion and Dragon and with Baptism of Fire, which is set in Poland. Lion and Dragon is set in late medieval England, but it was without a doubt, if Pendragon, especially the Great Pendragon campaign book, hadn't existed, I suspect that Lion and Dragon would never have existed either, right? Because it was one of the major influences on that game, And I didn't get to tell him that, because this was, when I interacted with him was before that. But we did have lengthy conversations about Arthurian, the Arthurian mythocycle, and I think I talked to him about there's this one point that people never quite get about, especially La Mort d'Arthur, which is basically the last of the most important Arthur stories, right? The one that was written by Thomas Malory, that Malory was a knight, and he was a knight that was engaged in the War of the Roses.
Oh, I know.
He was fighting.
He was killing
the
people.
Cousins' War.
Yeah.
Right. And in fact, my position is, I'm not the only one who says this, but I definitely believe it, because I've done a lot of research. Like Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion are set in the War of the Roses, right? And I'm a historian. I've done a lot of research on the time period. And to me, hang on, my cat's about to jump off of a balcony. And to me, Mallory, when he wrote La Mort d'Arthur, he was imprisoned as a prisoner of war, right?
Yeah.
At the time that he wrote
he was arrested because he was on the wrong side.
That's right. And it's very obvious that La Mort d'Arthur is really a metaphor for what he was living through, right? So it's actually one of these first kind of stories that have a real life allegory, right?
Yeah,
it's not really about Arthur. It's using Arthur to tell a story about the War of the Roses and the devastation.
Sort of, because he also says knights today are a bunch of jerks and they were evil, mean guys. And back in the Arthur, we need to be like those guys, be like good knights. And but as you see in Lord Arthur, like after the Grail quest, everything goes to hell in a handbasket. It gets dark after that time.
Yeah.
Interesting side note: Greg, King Arthur is usually said to have been in the 400s, and Greg said it 100 years later, and he said the reason is because in the 400s, like we know a lot about that time period. There's not really a good spot for King Arthur to be, but the 500s we don't know anything about it, so we can fit him in. Because
it's after everything after 476 becomes a bit more of a blur, and that's where you can sneak stuff in.
Exactly.
I think we talked about that too, actually. Anyway, let me see here. I'm just going to look quickly through the most recent comments in case I missed anything, but I don't think I did. All right. No. Okay. So let's carry on to the next topic. So first off, I guess after the obligatory first question, which we've now covered, what is it that you're doing nowadays, right? I know that, for example, you asked me to put a link, and it's in the description of this live stream. There's a link to your YouTube channel. I don't know if that's your main venue of social media communication.
Yes, well, I'm on X as well, right? But yeah, I'm easy to find.
Yeah, I've seen you quite a bit there recently.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm trying to monetize it. We'll see if that ever happens. It may not. It would be like a total like minor side gig. So what I'm doing now is the game Hyperspace, the tabletop board game, has been completely printed. It's in China, and we're about to ship it to the States, and then it will be available. So that's
tell us a bit about that board game. What's the deal with it?
So Hyperspace is set in a universe in the distant future. After Cthulhu rises up and wipes out Earth, so humans have escaped in these big generation ships. I mean, like 0.01% of the humans get away, right? Most of them are all killed by Cthulhu. So we've escaped, and there's all these weird aliens living in the galaxy. And in the game, you play. It's a 4X game. You know, explore, exterminate, expand, experiment, and you play one of these alien civilizations. The one can, one of them is. There's 25. One of them is human. And you're battling and doing all the stuff you do in another 4X game, with the exception that in Hyperspace, though it has all 4 of those facets, it's pretty fast to play. It's like an hour and a half, 2 hours to play. So it's really it's fast moving, fun. Like if you played any of my other board games, you get the idea. Very asymmetrical and weird. But the reason it's highly relevant to this topic is because at this time I'm also developing a Hyperspace role-playing game, and I've been playing it in a campaign here, trying to work out the bugs. And it's set in this universe in the distant future after Cthulhu's cleared off the Earth. And although not all, most of the aliens aren't like Cthulhu monsters, Lovecraft's monsters are all they're aliens, right? They're not like zombies and stuff. They're aliens, so they make sense to be in space. And so some of the alien races are Lovecraftian, and of course they're all super dangerous to deal with and terrible. But there's other aliens that are not so bad, things made of crystal, and also because Lovecraft didn't believe in humanoid aliens, and I don't either. So they're all really like the aliens are all weird jobs and really bizarre. And that's part of the fun of playing them in the board game, because the aliens, one of the things that I found that people really liked in the asymmetrical board games is when one of the civilization they play, it has advantages and special abilities, of course, but it also has flaws and problems that weaken it. And I found that people really seem to like own their flaws and go, oh yeah, I like that I'm a Cthulhu alien, so I have to sleep every once in a while and go into slumber. Or I'm this alien that has a grudge against people, and I have to, I'm always surprised when they attack me, that kind of thing. So
yeah, that's one of the things you can do with the kind of Cthulhu type entities is that they're not meant to act like people, right? So they can be really, they can have really weird random things, which ties back to what we were saying with medieval legend, that it's the same thing with elves, for example, right? In medieval legend, they look like people, but they don't act like them,
Sure, but heck, it even applies to other, like the Saxons, or the Celts. These guys, they don't think like us. The Celts worship these weird old gods. They're a bunch of jerks. The Saxons, and so even the humans in Arthurian legend can be pretty wild. So
that's true. But I'm meaning more that like they have you can pretty much do a random table of like some weird element that an alien species that isn't like the sort of alien species that you would have in a Lovecraftian type of setting, that would have them doing some really weird random thing at a random time, right? And nobody understands why they do it.
Right. It would make no sense. Well, think of it from the viewpoint of your cat. You do things all the time that make absolutely no sense to the cat, and it probably knows you as well as any human. And of course,
that's right. I would seem totally irrational to my cat.
And right. But the thing is, like, you've had a cat, and so that sometimes the cat does things that make absolutely no sense to you. And you're even smarter than the cat. You can't figure it out. Heck, I don't even know what my wife's thinking most of the time. I've been married to her for 46 years.
So I assume that you crowdfunded the Hyperspace board game?
I did. And then the company fell upon hard times, thanks largely to COVID. That was a killer for us, because what happened is that China, right after it came out during Chinese New Year, and so basically everyone had already gone home for Chinese New Year, and then the COVID crackdown came, and so none of the factories could produce any games. So we just lived off the games we had in stock until we ran out of them, and we kept making new games, which might have been foolish. But any second now, the restrictions are going to lift, and the guys can home and start working. Well, when the guys came home from the far frontier to start working in the factories again to make games, the factories didn't make games in first in and first out. It was like whichever ones were the most convenient to make, and none of them were ever my games, because mine are large, complicated games that I'm not making 150 copies of, right? And so we kept being put off. So basically, we ran out of stock, had no money, we're making new games, and then, kind of didn't go belly up exactly, but pretty close to it. But we still have all these games done. So when we finally managed to get together, and with help from the Quimbleys company, we shipped all of the new Cthulhu Wars shipment, and now Hyperspace is here. So we're kind of doing it in order of age. So I'm very excited for Hyperspace.
And I assume that you're going to also do a crowdfunding for the RPG.
Nope. RPGs are a lot cheaper to do than a game full of plastic figures. So we're probably not going to crowdfund again for quite a while, if ever. We're going to release things straight to the market so they can get them and play them.
Oh, that's great. Because I'm unusual for an indie designer. I've never done a crowdfunding, right? Because exactly like you say, right? Like rather than put myself on the line in that way, I would rather just get the book published and then see how it sells, right? And usually, in the long term, I probably make as well as I would have if I'd done a crowdfunder, maybe better, because then there's crowdfunding ends up having unexpected costs.
Well, crowdfunding treated me well, and one of the advantages of it is that if your game's going to sell before you make it, because if your crowdfunding flops, then no one wants it. That's actually a gift right from God to don't do this game, no one wants it. But now I'm to the point I know which games they want and don't want, and I think people rightly felt kind of burned by. I mean, I lost my shirt on that stuff, and I really literally put hundreds of thousands, like my entire retirement into it. So. But now it's coming out, and hopefully that will make back my nut, and then all will be well. I'm optimistic. But
So we got a super chat here. $20 from Sadwings Raging. First sack of familiar treats on me. Thank you very much, Sadwings. Really appreciate that. Let's see if there's any other comments here. No. All right. So so you've got that coming down the tube.
Yeah, so
now,
I got a bunch of other things coming down the tube. I got a board game called Terror Paths, which is essentially the Call of Cthulhu board game. I know Arkham Horror is a Call of Cthulhu board game, but Terror Paths is quite different because in Arkham Horror, every game is sort of randomized, but it's all sort of the same plot. You're going around Arkham, and there's ways to customize it, but essentially it's close the gates by going through them, and it's all the same thing. Well, Terror Paths, every game is like really different. Like you're playing different maps, and the things you're doing are one of the games you're starting to mutate as you're going through these caves. And you're trying to finish the job before you mutate into a non-human. And one of the games you're kidnapped by aliens, and you have to escape from the basement from the human cultists that serve them, and make it to the attic and kill the rat bat spider that's summoning the gate to the Yuggoth. And they're all these really strange things. One of them is basically the Texas Chainsaw Massacre gang are in this house. You're trying to stop them, and so it's every game experience. Like when you start playing a game of Terror Paths, you don't know how to win. You have to learn how to win while you're playing.
That's interesting.
Things, which I think is kind of a cool feature. Another cool thing about it is that the great terrible thing about all board games, one of the things that role playing sort of solved, is that you have to wait for your turn for those other slow guys to finish their turn. Terror Paths, everyone moves at the same time. Now you probably will discuss what order you're going to do things. How let's resolve this before this, but it's not set you then you then you then you. It's like let's all do it and figure it out.
So is it a collaborative board game? Like are the players working together?
Yeah, because it's like Call of Cthulhu. It's like a role playing game, so you're on the same team. Yeah. So we have that coming out. We have Hyperspace. We got the Hyperspace role playing game I'm working on, and the basic idea there is that humans are few and rare, and the humans are trying to find a place in the universe. We don't really have planets. We have like little bases here on rocks, and so you basically start with a spaceship, which you have to pay back eventually. So that gives the game master power over you to pay back the spaceship. It says, well, if you go on this mission, we'll knock $100,000 off the price of this, off your debt. So you can make him do things that are actually giving him money, which is great for the game master. And then you're all the crew of the spaceship sailing around and engaging. And combats are usually either in space on the ship fighting, or of course, hand to hand in a boarding action or on a planet surface. And anyway, that's enough of that. You got questions coming in.
I've got an interesting question here. Can Sandy spend a second on how he designs his board game from a pure mechanics perspective? Is some board game pro designers involved? How's the math planned out? Stuff like that.
Okay, well, that would be like a whole masterclass. But in brief, what I do, the things I do is the two key things. One of the very first things I do is and believe it or not, I start by writing the rules. Okay, and those rules are going to change a lot before they're done. But when I'm going through the rules, it lets me see where I'm leaving out stuff, and like, oh yeah, I need to have a map. So I'll go and build a map, and then I'll go back, and then I have a turn structure, then I have actions, then I need units for the actions, and then doing the rules helps me flush out the game. And then the next thing I do is, as early as possible, I make a playable version of the game, no matter how crude it is, as soon as I can, and I get that out and start playing it and testing it. And then I watch people play it, and I immediately see all the things that are going horribly wrong, and I can fix them. But I test and fix and test and fix and test and fix and do this, and it takes quite a while. I know other designers that kind of take more time to work out the details of the ramifications of the game, and then they're finished. Then they don't have as long a period of testing, and I have a lot longer time of testing. But the advantage of my system is that I know it's fun by the time I'm done, because I've seen the players laugh and enjoy it. And that's, and other guys, they can finish it. They hope it's fun, they think it's fun, but they haven't seen it being played as much, So anyway, those are two things I do. So I get a really early prototype with cardboard cutouts and little wooden or plastic figures, and So instead of like chaos bats, I use like battleships from some other game. But yeah, the math comes out. I do plan math out, but then the math has to be balanced as I see the game play. I'll say, you know, mathematically, this guy should be 4 times as good. But in the game, what I notice is that he's nowhere near 4 times as good. So I either lower his price or increase, you know, I fix it.
So I saw, because we're talking about the games you're designing right now. I saw on Twitter you had made a post saying that the game that you're working on now is going to be based on a D12, and you specifically stated your hatred of the D4.
It's going to have
is that the hyperspace game?
Yes, it's not based on the D12. It just has a D12.
Okay.
Because I love the D12, and I'm sad that a lot of games, notably RuneQuest, started getting rid of the D12, and I love D12. So they're the most fun dice to roll, and they look the coolest, right? And
well, I mean, it was Plato considered it the most important of the Platonic solids, you know. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, technically you can get by without it, but it's pretty cool to roll. It's fun to do. I used it in my game Planet Apocalypse, and it made my friends from Germany were like, it makes the D12 cool again. It's so cool to have a D12 in that game because it's really good to have a D12. And then the D4 is I'm dumping because I'm tired of those carpet caltrops. You know, it just.
I see. Well, I don't have any objection to the
D12. They don't roll well.
In my house games, in Lion and Dragon and Baptism of Fire, there's characters, when they go up in level, there's random benefits that they roll, and a lot of those are on a D12 table. But I do really like the D4. I don't know if you saw, but the logo for this series, for the RPG Pundit Encounter, is a D4 in a Gadsden flag format saying, "Don't tread on me."
It's only for me. Actually, sometimes I've noticed I needed a D4 in my game, in the hyperspace game. So my substitute for it is to make it a D6 minus 1.
Okay.
And then that gives you the average result as a D4, but with a little more on the edge.
Yeah.
And then I won't step on a D4 and kill myself too.
So you're doing all of this through your own company, is that correct? Because it is not something that you're doing with Chaosium, for example.
No. Well, Terror Paths is that board game that's going to be done with it's done by my company, but it'll have Chaosium's logo on it and their blessing. It's like the official thing, right? The official.
And that brings me to my next question. You know, how bad is Chaosium now?
Chaosium is great now. Those guys are good buddies of mine. Ever since what happened is that when Lynn Willis died some years ago, the way they'd set up the ownership of Chaosium was that Greg owned a third, and Lynn owned a third, and Charlie owned a third, and I had this little tiny, like a few percent that they gave me kind of as a going away present when I left. So I was like, yay, I own some of Chaosium. I never got like, you know, anything from it except that I had that bit. So, but the bylaw said that if someone died, their shares weren't inherited by someone else. They went back to the company. Okay, and the heirs were paid off for it. So Lynn's wife got paid off. The heirs, and that meant that now Greg Stafford and Charlie Crank had exactly equal shares. But here am I over in the corner with a little tiny bit of shares. So I was the king.
So you were the voting majority, in other words.
I was the kingmaker, and those guys, Charlie and Greg, were calling me nonstop, trying to get me to join with one of them. And I tried to make it work with Charlie for a long, long time, and in the end, I just couldn't. And so Greg and I essentially led a coup against Charlie, and then Moon Production, who loved everything RuneQuest, came in, and they took it over. And they are RuneQuest guys, not Call of Cthulhu guys, but they've got Mike Mason working for them, who is a Call of Cthulhu guy. So he kind of does their Call of Cthulhu stuff. And they even yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, I've got a follow-up question about that, but first we have a super chat from Frank Destrosso, $9.99. He says, "Do you think that technology, AI, VR, or AR, I'm not even sure what AR is, but I know the first two, will ever make the tabletop market unviable? P.S. Go watch Bill the Elf's channel, the greatest entertainment in the side of Monty Python." Yeah.
I think that the thing, I mean, I've used AI or VR and stuff, and what I notice is that, to me at least, maybe it's because I'm old, there's still not a substitute for sitting at a table and actually seeing your buddies smack talking about their moms when they make a mistake, and getting the table feel. And I don't get that same feel on a Zoom call, though I know some people seem to be able to do it. And I can do it, but it's just, I like the table. The firsthand experience is just better for me. I can't imagine. Here, let me give you an example. If I had the most awesome VR set in the world, I still wouldn't want to go to a birthday party via VR. I'd want to be there, right? And the tabletop game to me is like that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well,
I don't think
there's certain games that you just have to do it physically, right? Like I was talking about my love of Domino 5s, and I would never be playing that on a computer, right? Like you gotta have you have to have the tiles, It's
sure. Well, clearly, computer games and console games, digital games, cut into the role-playing market. Magic the Gathering cut into the role-playing market, but the role-playing market is still there. I think VR is going to cut into all the markets too, but I think it's going to impact consoles and computer games more than it is the role-playing games.
Yeah. Well, AI, in the sense of right now, the great controversy there is AI art. But if you're an indie designer like I am, having the option of using AI art is incredibly useful.
I mean, yeah, I'm in the happy position that I am able to actually pay artists to do it, but I'm not going to, wag my finger at guys that can't afford that.
My Baptism of Fire, my newest bestseller, it's 370 pages long, right? And the publisher wanted it to have tons of art, right? And the problem was that artists are fairly expensive, but also they're unreliable, and every time that whichever publisher I worked for, one of the things that slows down the rate of publication is art, right? Because they're waiting on people who are past their due date to send in the art. And what the publisher, I don't publish any of my own games, right? I have publishers that I work with, and Mad Scribe Games, who did Baptism of Fire, they did this incredible work of using an AI system which was inputted with a whole bunch of, because it's set in medieval Poland, right? And it's they filled it with Slavic art as the source material, all of which are from people who are long dead, right? Like none of them, no living artists were involved, right? And then it had the AI generate art in those styles, and so it has a really nice, really consistent style. The cover, I think, was one of the things that really helped sell the game, and that's AI. Although it was based on he had first commissioned someone to do a piece for it, but he felt that it wasn't. We both felt that it wasn't quite what we wanted, but it was similar, and so then we did an AI version of it. But
I either I've been really lucky with artists, or I have some secret I'm not even aware of, because I have not had any kind of problems with artists. I'm able to use them. I hire artists all the time. I have good, solid artists. I mean, we do vet them. And
I mean, you have to, and also that's part of the pay scale, right? Like, so if you've got, depending on your budget, it can make a difference. We've got another super chat. Wow, they're coming in like crazy today. MLF et le jeu de rôle en bref gives $27.99 Canadian. I'm guessing he's Quebecois. Two of my favorite designers in one live feed. I cannot thank you enough for your games, and yes, Baptism of Fire for the win. Thank you very much, MLF. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure Sandy does as well. I'm totally chuffed that you came on for this episode. It's really
happy to be earning you that money, I guess. Now I'm jealous. I'm happy to be earning you that money. Now I'm all jealous.
Well, you've got a bigger YouTube channel than I do, so I'm sure you can do
I don't do live streams with this kind of thing. I just got to figure out how to do that.
Well, it's not that hard. If you're doing a live stream where it's just you can do it directly with YouTube, right? And if you want to have a guest or something, you just get StreamYard. And I'm the biggest technological illiterate there is, and I figured out how to use StreamYard. It's really simple.
Maybe I'll put that together.
But yeah, it's something to think about. So my follow-up question with Chaosium is that I'm sure that there's a lot of people, because I mean, certainly my fans are on the anti-woke kind of side of things, and it certainly seems like Chaosium has gone pretty much hard on the wokeism of late, which is especially weird for Call of Cthulhu, right? Like Call of Cthulhu is not a game where wokeism really works.
Because like two of the main guys, that there's 4 owners of it, and 2 of them are actually quite conservative, but I think they're scared of. I think they're a little behind the times, being scared of the cancel culture. But you know, whatever.
Do you think that might change now that it's like, because basically for the last year, woke has really been hit hard by events, starting with like October 7th and then all the way to Trump winning the election, right? Like,
yeah, I know.
Zuckerberg just said he's de-woking Facebook.
They're doing what they think is right, and that's fine. They're not. I mean, look, one of my favorite designers, and I recently posted this, was Jack Rady. Did People's War Games, and this guy was a card carrying communist, which is the complete opposite political thing for me. Now, he came by it honestly. He wasn't like a hippie commie. His parents were Wobblies, the IWW, International Workers of the World. Yeah. We kind of got it from there. So he's almost like a Stalinist Nazi, right? Yeah. But he was a super nice guy, and his games are great. And he did not put his politics into the game. Yeah. Which is probably easier if you're in war games than if you're in role-playing games. But I will say this about Jack Rady: when the USSR fell, he stopped being a communist. Mm-hmm. And I said, Jack, what the heck? You've been a communist your whole life. What's this? He says, well, the Russians should know if it's good or not. They say it's not. So he took them at their word and he quit. Now, he didn't become like a right-wing Republican or anything, but he did have the brains to back down on that.
We got another super chat here, $5 from John Edgar. Thank you, Sandy, for your years of great Call of Cthulhu RPG fun. We really owe you a huge debt. And I've got in my Last Sun campaign, but by the way, the guy before that was touting Bill the Elf's channel. That's the channel that has the audio tracks of every session that I've run of World of the Last Sun, which is my longest running campaign. And it's been going on. It's almost at the 12-year mark now. In that campaign, we've had a lot of players, but one of the guys that was very iconic in that campaign is a guy who is, I live in South America, and of course there are commies here, but they tend to be the traditional commies, not the kind of woke commies. And this guy was one of those. Yeah. He was literally a card carrying member of the Trotskyist party here, but he didn't care because he could laugh at all the nonsense that we have in it. It's a very funny campaign, right? It's a Gonzo fantasy campaign, and he was just perfect for it. And politics didn't get in the way of that. And it's the same thing with a game designer. A game designer could be very left wing, but if his games are politically neutral, it doesn't matter. Right? I tend to be a conservative libertarian, but my games, none of them have any kind of political propaganda in them. They have. Sometimes they have historical propaganda in them, but never political propaganda, And so that doesn't matter. The problem is when you're kind of like putting in stuff that is clearly not meant to enhance the setting, but rather to like provide some kind of propaganda or to try to educate your readers. That sort of stuff is
sure. Yeah, if I want to educate my readers, I'm going to educate them about historical stuff or science stuff, not about politics, because they don't need my politics. I will say that someone was talking about how they like Call of Cthulhu stuff. I forgot to mention. So under Chaosium's auspice, I am doing my own. I'm coming back to Call of Cthulhu and doing Call of Cthulhu adventures published by me. So the first one that we're going to do is called Big C. That's Big SEE. And one of the differences between ours and the Chaosium ones is ours are set in modern times, and they're all really kind of extreme. Like the Big C takes place in the Washington State Three Cities area, and it's about a drug cult which is run by the Cthulhu cult, and so it's like one of the ongoing enemies is a star spawn. That's one of Cthulhu's race, and so periodically this huge monster shows up. Like it's always stormy when he appears, like naturally, so that it's always deniability, and he tries to. And the player, and mostly the fights against him are just, we must get away because this thing's 300 feet tall. But
sorry,
we do a book of the Gambler, and we have others. So,
sorry, this was the one I wanted to show here. So Rob Mann says here, there's sections in recent releases of Chaosium works that warn players about potential trigger warnings from racist content due to the period of the game. Like, if you don't know that about Call of Cthulhu, like, what are you doing?
Monsters that literally remove your brain and carry it away in a can, and that suck you into pieces, and they're worried about someone being, I guess, well, sure, whatever, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, that so much isn't so much to me the issue, but it's when like you start having. Because one of the things that Call of Cthulhu did really well in both like the 1920s and they had the Victorian Cthulhu was that it was historic. It tried to be historically accurate, right? Like there's magnificent stuff in some of the adventures where you're globe trotting and things like that are like very, very clearly researched to be period accurate, right? And then when you suddenly like switch that around and have like some character who is famous and beloved investigator or professor or something like that, that's a black woman, and like you shouldn't have. I'm not saying you can't have black women characters in a Cthulhu game, but they should, like, if you were actually trying to make some kind of a message, you should have it reflect what the reality was for those people at the time, right?
Well,
like not just do this race swapping thing that you see on TV shows too, right? Where suddenly you've got
Chaosium. What it looks like they're doing, if I just take this at face value, is they are leaving the racist stuff. They're just warning people about it.
Well, yeah,
I think there's been a bit of both those things needed for me, but I guess if you're an absolute snowflake, you might like having it. But it looks like that. But they have racist content, so they aren't leaving it out.
Yeah. I think the main thing that they're saying is that it's like. That they're actually, the warning that they're giving is basically that Lovecraft was a racist, which he was, but it's just silly, right? If you're really profoundly offended by the racism of Lovecraft and you think that it somehow taints everything about the Cthulhu mythos, you shouldn't be publishing Cthulhu stuff, right? Like that's basically the
the thing is that Lovecraft's admitted racism was not, how can I put it? It was, well, two factors of it. First, it didn't come through into most of his stories.
No.
Okay, you can read all of Dunwich Horror, and the only racism there is that white people who live up in the backwoods are inbred. Which I guess you know. And the other thing is that he got less. Racism is terrible. It's not, to me, it's not a problem of a crime, but a problem of a wrongly held belief, which means the cure to it isn't punishment, but education. And Lovecraft was getting less racist over time. The other critical thing is Lovecraft's racism never cost anyone a job. He never was in a lynch mob. He just sat around and thought bad things about people that didn't look like him, which,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure based also on where he lived and that he barely had an opportunity.
It's not like he had a lot of friends that weren't racist, right? Yeah. Race, Well, I had one guy give me this big spiel about how he hated Jews, and Lovecraft, some of his letters, he sounds pretty anti-Semitic, but then he married a Jew, right? And how racist, how anti-Jew. If we were all held up to our private email correspondence, we'd all find terrible things we could look in there, and that's kind of what Lovecraft's letters were. But I am an expert in H.P. Lovecraft. That is true.
That is true. Yeah, certainly more than me. But I'm going to actually change the subject in my next question here, because I would like to know, first off, what your feelings are about Dungeons and Dragons, both like the original D&D and D&D through its history, but also I'm very curious to know if you've had any experience with either like the present day version of the D&D rules, like the 5e rules, or if you've looked into the OSR at all.
I have not looked into the OSR. Do you think I should?
No, that's too bad, because all my games are OSR games. So.
Well, so here's the thing. So I am in the happy position that, well, okay, old school role playing. Well, I guess my games are all OSR then, because
yeah, well, OSR is a specific design school that takes the original, like the old school D&D rules, and then does really weird experimental things with them, right? Like, now there's also a section of the OSR that all they do is kind of like reproduce, like, let's say the basic expert set from the 1980s, right? And they just rewrite those rules in a different format, and so that people that never had that experience can try them. So like Old School Essentials is one example, or Labyrinth Lord. But then there's other stuff like my games and stuff done by a number of other people, right? Lamentations of the Flame Princess, Dungeon Crawl Classics, that take the basic skeleton of the D&D rules and then warp them into really weird different dimensions that suit a particular genre or a particular style of play or a particular setting, right? Like there's one that I always mention as like one of the best examples of this, which is it's OWB, Operation White Box, right? Which takes the White Box D&D rules and turns them into a game where you play Allied commandos fighting in World War II, right? And it's just brilliant, right? Like, and there's tons of games like that. So it's like one of the best design schools that have come out in RPGs in recent years.
Well, I have two things to say about that. One is that I'm in the happy position that all of that, whenever I play a role-playing game, it's essentially always my house rules, because because it's a published game, but it's what I wrote. And the other is that I haven't played D&D since 1978.
Okay.
But I am surprised to have people.
I guess that sums up your feelings on D&D.
Well, RuneQuest plays. Here's the thing. The concept behind D&D, the whole role-playing thing, that was absolutely like earth-shattering to me. Okay, but D&D I always thought was a terrible, terrible system. I mean, the experience points and the character classes and the lack of skills and the weird saving throw things and the way the combat sort of worked, they're all were nitpicky and weird. You know, I never liked that stuff. So when RuneQuest came along, didn't have character classes, didn't have experience points, didn't have and you couldn't describe your character by saying, I'm a 9th level wizard, or I'm a 17th level insurance salesman, or whatever you are. You're just like, well, my guy rides a horse. He's like a horse nomad, and he's also pretty good at singing. Then that was a more interesting character to me. So Call of Cthulhu followed kind of.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Oh, shoot. We've lost him. What happened? Oh, wait, he's coming back, guys. He's coming
sorry,
back.
I bumped something on my keyboard and it went off.
That's okay. All right, no harm done. I'm gonna interrupt you for 1 second though, because
anyway, I know it's controversial, but I always thought D&D was kind of a terrible system. So
okay, give me 1 second here, because I'm gonna read out this super chat. Vincenzo Vereta, that's a great last name. 10 euros. I worked on the Italian edition of Call of Cthulhu with the late Giovanni Ingelis Stratelibri.
Stratelibri, yeah, I remember Stratelibri.
That started my career in gaming. I'm still playing today. Thank you. And the reason I wanted to read that
in 2012 to the Lucca Game Convention, which was amazeballs. So that was cool. One of the best things there is they had a parade around the room of characters from. Oh wait, no. The best thing was they had a live-action Call of Cthulhu adventure in this old. They had a live band. People were dancing, and at the climax, they had a full-size Me-Go monster towered 10 feet above everyone, was stalking out on all 4 legs and eat everyone. It was brilliant.
Those Italians are nuts. So the reason I wanted to get that out of the way is because there's another comment here. Tabletop Gaming with Wolf Phototech. he's pointed out that you have in fact published several incredible adventures for D&D 5th edition in the Cthulhu Mythos 5e line. He's bought most of them off
adventures,
Amazon.
whole campaigns.
Yeah.
For it now, but the way
I'm guessing you didn't do the designing there, right?
I worked out the whole campaign. Everything was going to happen, but without regards to what rules would make that happen.
Right.
So, for example, the first one, Ghoul Island, the climax of it is the characters have to take this statue and lug it through these tunnels into the heart of the volcano and throw it into the lava pool and then escape while the volcano erupts and all the ghouls are running around and Gafnatho is trying to get them. And that's the part I did. And then like the poor guy that put it into work had to work out what D&D rules would be for being chased by lava down a hall.
Mm-hmm.
And we also did the Dungeons & Dragons, the Sandy Petersen's Cthulhu Mythos for 5e, in which, again, I did the backdrop of it and how everything was supposed to work, except without knowing what the specific rules were. And then, like I said, we're going to have one of the character classes is going to be cats. Okay, you can be a cat. Lovecraft loved cats, so you can be a cat in it. Not like a super cat. You're just a cat. But of course, Lovecraft cats, when they go to the Dreamlands, they're fully intelligent. So what we played is that when you're a cat, if you go to the Dreamlands, you can either come back and wake up naturally in case you're still just a cat again, or you can come back physically from the Dreamlands, and then you can retain your intelligence the next time you want to not be intelligent again. And so
I'm gonna jump in here because since we were talking about the OSR, another great publisher of OSR games is the Red Room, who do a whole series. They've done tons of series of RPGs that are all in this line that they call the Wretched Verse, which is sort of like if every genre you can imagine was done as in the style of a spaghetti western, with you're playing these kind of anti-heroes and things like that. They have an online store called the Red Room Store, and I publish there the Pundit Files, which is a kind of periodical I put out every 3 weeks. And I just wanted to comment to viewers that the latest issue of the Pundit Files is out now, and it is called Short, which is itself a parody or a homage, you could say, of Venger Satanis's Chalt setting. It is completely done with his approval. I started working on it when he had announced that he was going to stop publishing RPGs. And then a week later, he said he changed his mind. He's still going to publish RPGs, but I went ahead anyway. So, be sure to check out. That's the Pundit Files number 26, short. And if you're not into that, there's 25 other issues. Each one has like all kinds of different stuff, adventures and settings and character classes for my games and all kinds of other things. So check them out. You can only get those at the Red Room store, and they all cost $3.50. So if you can get someone to give you $3.50, you can pick up an issue of the Pundit Files. All right, that's my little ad blurb that I obligatorily make here.
All right. Well, what I have to say about the Wretched Verse is, of all the games, I think I did the role-playing game with the very darkest universe. The Lovecraft universe is not one of hope. But that's also true. I did a game with the absolute most heroic heroes, because you're doing yourself with no hope or reward. You're not getting your big treasure at the end of the adventure is a moldy old book that sends you nuts by looking at the pictures. Like, you can't tell anyone about what you did, because if they find out, it'll destroy the world. So Lovecraft guys, our heroes are the most heroic, and the world is the darkest. So there's certainly a place for anti-heroes. Who doesn't like spaghetti westerns, right?
Yeah. And I've got to say, to kind of close this question, that I quite like the Chaosium system, and I think it works especially well for something like Call of Cthulhu, like when you're playing a modern game. But I also do, very obviously, because of all the books I've made that are D&D based, basically, that I like the D&D system at its core. I'm not a big fan of the latest edition, even though I helped make it. But I still I find that the archetypes of class are especially useful if you're doing heroic fantasy. But I like them both.
I played RuneQuest for most of my fantasy role-playing stuff, and we got by fine without classes. But I mean, you kind of put your guys into your own class because you say, well, I want to do I want to worship the storm god or something, you know, and be a barbarian. But so I think you
All right. So my next question.
Trained playing D&D, so RuneQuest was a liberator for me. But
yeah, I can understand that.
D&D, so I mean, I was playing D&D from literally when it first came out. So I'm an original adopter of D&D, and I was in fact when Chaosium published their White Bear Red Moon tabletop board game, which was, you know, armies fighting in his world of Glorantha. And I bought that, and RuneQuest wasn't out. So I did a D&D campaign set in that map of the of Glorantha. So I did play D&D in Glorantha before I played RuneQuest in Glorantha. So
my next question would be, it's kind of a two-part question, but the first part is, what is the product you made that you are the most proud of? What's your favorite, let's say?
The role-playing game I'm most proud of, sadly, has to go back and be Call of Cthulhu, because I marvel at 25-year-old me doing such an interesting game. I feel inspired by it. The computer game I'm very most proud of working on is Age of Empires 3, The Age of Colonization, because I really think I went above and beyond in making that good. And the board game I'm most proud of is Cthulhu Wars, because I thought that was going to be the last game I was ever going to do, and it would sell a couple thousand copies, and it would help support me while I moved to India and did iPhone games or something. And instead, it like gave me a whole new game company. Instead of being my swan song, it was my phoenix, and I was reborn.
That's excellent. Yeah, and Call of Cthulhu, I have to say, was like the system, the Chaos. I'm not sure how much of that was you or the other guys, but
the basic role-playing system of the percentile dice for stats, that was the system they gave me to work with.
Okay.
But all the rest of it with me. You had to figure out which skills you're going to have in Call of Cthulhu, right? Which are not going to be the same as you have.
Well, the Sanity system was also really revolutionary at the time.
Yes, and the Sanity system, I didn't back into it by accident exactly, but what happened with it was in the stories by Lovecraft. One of the ways I do the guy that asked about how to do board games and role-playing games, one of the things I do is I'm a theme guy. I don't make a system and then add theme onto it. You know, there's a lot of designers that do that, and that's fine. That's them. I like to do the theme first, and then the system has to work out within that. So I wanted to make Call of Cthulhu seem like you're in a Lovecraft story. And I noticed that Lovecraft's heroes, like, they go crazy and faint a lot. So I said, well, I'm gonna have the monsters have a sanity stat, and monsters will scare you, and you'll lose sanity, and you might run away, or you might go indefinitely mad, or you might go permanently mad. If you read the books, it'll drive you mad, because that's a big thing in the stories. And I thought of this only as another weapon the monsters had. In addition to like blasting you with magic or eating you, they could scare you by looking scary. Okay, so I did the sanity system, and then the very first time I tested it in Davis, California, I was going to school there, graduate school. The characters are going into this old house. It's the scenario is called The Haunted House, and it's still available. It's the first scenario ever played in Call of Cthulhu. And they know how I said, and they're trying to summon up this monster because they think it's what's haunting the house. And so I say, oh, you heard a screeching in the air, and then this clawed hand comes through, and then something totally unexpected happened. One of the players said, I run away. Another one said, I'm covering my face. Another one said, I'm going to the corner and looking away. And I couldn't imagine this happening in D&D. You want to see what the monsters do, and you need knowledge is power, right? But what was happening is that the players were acting as if the characters were afraid by having them run away and not look at it. And I was smart enough to say, whoa, I'm onto something here, because it's making people act afraid. So I clung onto that, and that became the heart and soul of the system, because it worked, and I did not expect it to work that way. I will say also, one of the guys here asked if there's a lot of women playing it in Japan. So here's the deal. In America, and you may have noticed this, in general, games of Call of Cthulhu usually have a few more women in them than D&D games. D&D games, a lot of them is like a bunch of college guys and maybe a girlfriend dragooned in. Call of Cthulhu is like one or two women that are there for the game. You know, maybe 20% women, whereas 5% for D&D. Well, it's more less. If you get older, there's more women, right? Well, but Call of Cthulhu, I think, inherently appeals more to women because it's not about kill monsters, get experience, kill bigger monsters, get loot, kill that cycle. And that's a great cycle. It's super fun. But Call of Cthulhu doesn't have that cycle because you can't go kill the monsters, right? I mean, you can, but the weakest monster is a cultist who's just as good as you, and plus, like, more ruthless and better organized. So. Yeah. So I always thought if Call of Cthulhu was if you didn't have to go through the great filter of D&D before you played Call of Cthulhu, there'd be more women playing it. And what happened? This is what happened in Japan. They didn't play D&D first because D&D is this weird Western thing. I mean, some people play it, but it's just, you know, it's kind of an obscure game. But Call of Cthulhu made it big. It's the dominant role-playing game in Japan. It's way bigger than D&D or Pathfinder. Okay, and it's 70% women. So it's done is so well. I know usually if someone says my game does good in Japan, it's code word for my game does sucky everywhere else. But it genuinely does good in Japan. They sell more copies of my game in Japan than the rest of the world combined.
Wow.
And they're mostly women, which means the average player of my Call of Cthulhu game is a 18 to 35-year-old Japanese woman.
Wow.
I got to go there to a convention, and there was all these women selling they have an open game license for Call of Cthulhu there, so anyone can do a little adventure. So they all have their little adventures with an anime character on front for Call of Cthulhu, and then they were all bowing and scraping to me. I tried really hard to make my wife jealous, but I failed. She just laughed at me.
So the follow-up question is, what is your favorite RPG product that you had nothing to do with creating?
The Dying Earth.
Okay, interesting.
I thought that was cool. I also really quite liked the I can't think of the name of it now. It's based on the Robert Rogers Lasny series.
Amber.
Yeah, where you voted on who got the highest strength in the universe and second highest strength. I thought that was a really clever way of designing your character. I have no idea if it works in practice, but it was pretty cool.
It does. I played years and years of Amber. I was Eric Wujcik was basically kind of my mentor in both, like, originally like DMing and then later in design. I had tons of, because he worked for a long time in China, and we both had a mutual interest in Chinese mysticism and things like that, and so. Mm-hmm. We got to talking quite a lot. Again, it was a relationship over email, basically. But he was actually a moderator on the Amber forum of my my online RPG forum, the RPGsite.com, which is still around and still has tons of really interesting threads and conversations. And he was a moderator until the day he passed away. He was a great guy.
I also was always very impressed with the Tecmo world. It never had a decent role-playing rules for it. They always had like the suckiest rules in history. But man, it's an interesting world. I finally took their world and adapted it to RuneQuest so I could play the damn thing. And but also it's hard to do that with because it's super. It's such a complex world. You have to like be really deep into it to play it. You know, you can't just throw a guy in and expect him to figure out what's happening. So I've only run a campaign of that once, but I did.
And that leads me into the next question. How often do you actually play RPGs nowadays?
I play RPGs approximately twice a month. Well, 3 times a month, because I am playing my hyperspace game a couple times a month, and my 14-year-old granddaughter. You're gonna sound like you're gonna make me sound like a creepazoid. Basically, her friends were. She didn't feel she was trying to run a role-playing game with her friends, and it wasn't working right. And so she came to me crying and said, "Grandpa, you have to run the game for me." So I'm running the game for a bunch of teenage kids once a month.
Well, those are the luckiest teenage kids in the world, right? When one of your grandparents is Sandy Petersen, you're not going to go wrong there.
Well, I mean, they don't know that. They just know I'm Madeline's grandpa, you know. So like they have one day they'll find out maybe. I do remember that when my daughter was going to school, she wore my Doom shirt that said my dad wrote it, and a whole bunch of like highly unsuitable guys started to hit on her. But
well, that is the risk, I guess. All right. So I wanted to ask you another question. I looking at your biography, at least assuming Wikipedia is correct about this, which it isn't always these days. But you're a member of the Latter-day Saints Church, is that correct?
Absolutely am. Active too. In fact, to this very day, I attended a service.
So do you that's interesting because I mean the other game personality that I know of that is LDS is Tracy Hickman.
Yes, in fact, he and I went to the same high school. He was like 2 years behind me. And so like he was a puny sophomore when I was a senior, so we weren't friends or anything, but I knew who he was. Another person kind of in my church, Lonnius, he did the designer of Arkham Horror.
Oh yeah.
Well, he's actually in church, but you know.
This kind of ties into what my question. You know, I have 2 degrees, right? One is in history, the other one's in comparative religion, and so I've done a lot of study on religious topics, and you know, occasionally that falls into my interest in RPGs. You know, like I wrote an RPG called Arrows of Indra, which is based on the Mahabharata, for example, but. And well, Baptism of Fire is about the Christianization of Poland, right? But I've noticed over the years that I think that LDS people are overrepresented in the RPG hobby, right? As in there's a lot of Mormons who play RPGs.
We're highly
educated. Do you have any idea why you think that is?
We're highly educated. We're able to read archaic sounding things like the King James Version of the Bible and our Book of Mormon. And we like history.
That's
we're all into genealogy, you know. So I was able to find out that I have 2 ancestors that came over on the Mayflower. How cool is that?
Yeah, I know that there's Mormons are very dedicated to studying family histories. So back in the 80s. Obviously, there was a lot of pushback against RPGs, Dungeons and Dragons in particular, but I'm sure Call of Cthulhu would probably have made the list as well, from Protestant and Catholic churches alike about how they were worried about RPGs, right?
Well,
did that happen at the LDS?
Well, my church didn't attack me for role-playing games, but some groups in my church came after me for Doom.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
For the violent video games.
Well, you know, yeah. I mean, look, I had Joe Lieberman and Tipper Gore stand up in Congress holding up a copy of my game and denouncing it. So that was pretty awesome.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting.
That everyone like I'd be on radio programs and they'd say, "Oh, so the Republicans are hush," and I said, "Actually, it's always Democrats that are going after my Doom and stuff. So it's not Republicans." You know,
well, Democrats are ironically in some ways bigger moralists, right? And they've just kind of now changed the in the last 20 years they've changed the alignment of their morals. You know,
well,
they're the ones that have always kind of been more favorable to government intervention on things. You know,
well, I mean, the Republicans might think I'm bad, but they're not going to ban me from doing it. They're just going to, you know.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, look, I know my religion is odd. I view that as an extra reason to think it might be true, you know, rather than a downer. But I also have the view that all religions and even philosophies that aren't religious are attempts of humans to seek out truth. For me, that means trying to get God. So I don't view religions as being like the true religion or the false religion. Is more, I think some religions have more truth than others. Right. So of course I think mine has the most, but it doesn't mean that someone that's reading the Bhagavad Gita doesn't have any truth. You know, maybe they have as much truth as they can handle. So
well, the study of comparative religion was like kind of the the founder of comparative religion was a Romanian scholar named Mircea Eliade, and he's not very popular in certain circles now, but he was his research was focused basically on the notion of the origins of religion itself, and that there is in fact what used to be called a philosophia perennia, right? That there is a core formula of religion that started probably with like ancient prehistoric shamanism, and that every world religion today still has kind of that basic code at the bottom of it, or at least every successful religion does.
Well, see, my argument would be that's the thing that God gave us, because
right, that is a very legitimate argument to make.
Stuck that in us. That need for religion, that original code that's from Him, is what I would.
Well, it's you can definitely say that, and you could also say that it means that because religion isn't random, right? It's a product of the human soul, let's say, right?
No animals
have
an
aspiration for the higher power, right? And also for a moral order to the world. And so, of course, it's going to end up being the case that, as you say, there are some religions that are perhaps more functional than others, and there are some religions that are more sophisticated than others. But there's underneath them all, there is that same kind of formula, which is the longing for that connection to something higher than yourself. You know,
you can have you can have terrible things in the name of religion, right? You can have terrible things in the name of anything, but I mean, I come from a religion that was like heavily persecuted. Our founder was murdered, right? So I know all about the religious persecution thing, but I don't think it's an inherent part of religion. I think that's an inherent part of humans to find some reason to pick on the other.
Well, you know, a while back you had, you know, when the new atheism was going on, there was this pithy saying that people had
in Lovecraft circles, you know, because Lovecraft was atheist. So I'm out of sync with Lovecraft, you know, but that's okay.
Well, they had this saying that said, well, you know, that you can have good people that do good things, and you have bad people that do bad things, but for a good person to do bad things, you need religion, right? And I think that the product of what came after that over the last few years, at least to me, has very much proven that it's exactly the opposite that is the case, right? That you can have bad people in religion doing bad things, but for a good person to do bad things, you need the absence of religion, where a person, because when there's the absence of religion, it doesn't mean you don't worship anything. It means you're going to worship something that isn't the highest power.
Have that motivation for something else.
Yeah, you're going to worship wealth, or you're going to worship beauty, or you're going to worship yourself, which is probably the most common one of all, you know, and that's where you end up doing bad things. But there we are. All right, so that's the religious segment of the interview. But on the related note, it is interesting that, you know, you are obviously a religious person, and yet you're most associated above everything else with Call of Cthulhu when it comes to RPGs. And of course, you pointed out Lovecraft was an atheist, but more than that, the Lovecraftian mythos is unbelievably nihilist, right? It's like part of what I've always pointed out about Call of Cthulhu is that in a way, a lot of people today can't really understand it at all, because they think the horror of Cthulhu is like tentacle monsters, and that's not what it is at all, right? Like Lovecraft was writing at a time where modernism had become the dominant philosophy, right? And that
Lovecraft hated.
Yeah, but the context of that modernism, the cosmic horror of Cthulhu, of the mythos, is a modernist horror, which is that the biggest horror is that the universe is meaningless, right? That it has that you don't matter at all to it. But we now live in a postmodern universe, and in that postmodern universe, in a way, it's as if the insanity that Lovecraft described, which was a world where everybody collapsed into this dark age of hedonism, is what has actually come to pass, right? Is that now postmodernists aren't scared of a meaningless world. They think it frees them to make their own meanings, you know, and so it's quite funny that means that most people that have grown up under postmodernism can't really get the terror that is the bigger cosmic terror of Cthulhu. They can just kind of get the tentacle monster part of the terror, which I think kind of reduces Cthulhu's brand to schlock, right?
I mean, the original terror of the story, Call of Cthulhu, is that Cthulhu is Earth's poison pill. He's going to wipe everything out when he comes back, and there's absolutely nothing we can do to stop him. But my whole life growing up, we're like, well, there's going to be a nuclear war. It's going to kill us all. So we already had the end of the world going on. So Cthulhu was like just another way of doing that. You know?
Yeah, it became that's true. When you're talking about the 60s to the late 80s, it was a kind of metaphor for nuclear devastation. Yeah.
But you know.
But so how do you reconcile the nihilism of Cthulhu with because like, for example, Tracy Hickman famously did Dragonlance, right? And Dragonlance, although a lot of gamers don't realize this, it's very Mormon, right? Like it has the golden discs. It has the idea of rediscovering the lost religion. It has these powerful moral overtones. But you instead dedicated yourself to a game that is that the genre of that game is like is that nihilist message. You know, have you ever had like any?
Well, remember early on in this discussion, we were talking about being woke and cancel. I said I don't want to put my politics or beliefs into the game. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you're playing Lovecraft, whether there's a god or not, it's not known to you. There's certainly Cthulhu. Someone said, but there's religious. Well, of course there's religious elements in Lovecraft. Brendan Davis says that it's full of them because you have all these cults. But the cool thing about Lovecraft's cults is that they are essentially at their core all atheist. You don't worship Cthulhu because you're going to get to live forever with Cthulhu in heaven. You worship Cthulhu because when he comes back and starts eating everyone, you can go and kill and rape and plunder and murder just along with Cthulhu. It's a very physical, very here and now thing. There's no evidence that the Cthulhu cult is believing in any kind of afterlife. They just want to go and kill people with Cthulhu, you know. And then of course you have like the guy in Dunwich Horror. His kids, he like prostitutes his daughter to Yog-Sothoth to have half human kids. Well, his benefit is that his kids will rule the world, you know. Mm-hmm. Or you go to the deep ones in the Sword of Innsmouth. Have you seen the movie Dagon? Ever? No. There's a movie called Dagon, and it's exactly the Lovecraft story of Shadow over Innsmouth. And in the story, what happens is if you agree to do the deep one stuff, they'll give you gold, and then your kids will live forever. But they have to turn into fish monsters and live under the sea. So it's always everything is very materialistic, which is, I think, it's there's not like this complicated theology you have to describe. It's no, we're going to go off to the festival and learn evil spells to conquer and eat other people, you know. So it's even their religious stuff is nihilistic, and makes them, I think, scarier than someone that just wants to go off and like handle snakes and speak in tongues. They're harmless, right? But a guy that wants to turn you into a snake, he's not harmless.
That's true. All right. So I've got a question here that was from somebody on Twitter that wasn't going to be able to make it tonight. He asked, so this is a Cthulhu question, a Cthulhu RPG question. He says, how do you get new players to embrace the sanity grindstone that only weakens their character? It's contrary to the standard RPG experience of expecting improvement as one goes.
Okay, so I have two ways of going about it. If the guy is a sophisticate in role-playing games, I explain it this way. I say, if you want a game where you go and kill a bad guy, and you get treasure and get better, and go kill a bigger bad guy and get treasure and get better, and do that and go through that cycle, that compelling cycle, then you can play literally every single other role-playing game out there. But if you want a very contrarian game, which is not like that at all, then that's Call of Cthulhu. And the way I get people who are not role-playing sophisticates is I say, you like horror movies? You like ghost stories? They say, yeah, let's play this one. and if they're completely like not into Lovecraft or don't know about him, then the first story is going to have a werewolf or a ghost or a zombie, and that usually hooks them if they like horror stories. And then later on, the cults and the tentacle monsters can come in, and of course by then they dig it. So
that's a good answer. Yeah, I find it interesting that
I was consciously making Call of Cthulhu different for every. I didn't know the word contrarian then, but that's what it is. You don't want to get into fights. You want to explore things. You're trying to do mysteries, and people like mysteries. Mystery movies are popular, right? And that's what you and like. If you see a horror movie, it's not about going to shoot the monsters. Well, maybe a zombie movie is, but and so it's anyway. I'm rattling on, but that's
well. I was going to say that I find it very interesting that Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu, is because of the way that the mechanics work. In certain ways, it's not really. It doesn't really lend itself very well to a very long-term campaign. But as a result of that, probably some of the greatest adventures ever written for RPGs were the ones that were written mostly in the 80s for Call of Cthulhu, right? Some of these like epic ones that are
obviously you can
remembered forever.
Yeah. You can do a campaign in Call of Cthulhu, but man, is it good for one-shots. It's way better for one-shots than D&D is.
Yeah. Or for short campaigns. Like, I mean, one of the campaigns I ran that was the most memorable to me was Masks of Nyarlathotep, and that was a great it's a bit more pulpy than your average Cthulhu adventure, and my players loved it.
No, it's a lot of fun.
There's a lot of those that were brought out by Chaosium in the let's say the peak period of the company that were just fantastic.
The author of Mask of Nyarlathotep was president of the Screenwriters Guild for a while. He wrote for cartoons mostly, like Ghostbusters stuff. Yeah, and sadly he has now passed away. He's a good friend of mine. Been to his house. He's been to mine. Played Call of Cthulhu together, and he actually put the Petersen family into one of his Ghostbusters cartoons. They were the Petersens. It was called Dairy Farm of the Living Dead. At Peterson's. He also did a Cthulhu one called Collect Call of Cthulhu, but I wasn't in that one.
It makes sense because Nyarlathotep as a it's this world spanning campaign, and it has a very cinematic feel to it, right? Like it borrows a lot, I think, from movies actually.
I think so.
Call of Cthulhu is perfect for convention one-shot games. Yeah,
it is. That's because if you want to do a D&D one-shot, then you have to have the characters like 8th level character. You have to in practice, you have to make an 8th level character right off the bat instead of because normally you want to build your guy up to that level. Well, in Call of Cthulhu, your starting characters are pretty much as good as an advanced one because you get crappier over time instead of better. So it's easy to fit right in. Your character doesn't have to have this long, complicated history of how he got to be a 9th level wizard. He's just like, I'm a private eye. That's also a convenient thing about doing things in the modern world, which is that it's really like if you're playing in a fantasy world and you say this guy is one of the Skraelings, then what's a Skraeling? What's their culture? What's their background? What's their gods? But if you're doing a modern world, you say, well, this guy's from Turkey, and I think he's some kind of a thug, and that there's all these stereotypes that go in that can help you figure out what this guy's like.
Got an interesting post here by Rob Man. Robert Bloch wrote several episodes of Trek and made multiple references to the old one. Season 1, What Little Girls Are Made Of, is a Trek adaptation about the Mountains of Madness.
I saw that episode. It didn't seem particularly Mountains of Madness to me, but if it was Robert Bloch, Robert Bloch got his start because Lovecraft mentored him, right? So that's one of the things that made Lovecraft super important. It wasn't just that he wrote scary tentacle monster stories. He also invented the concept of a shared universe where he had other guys use his books and characters and places. No one had done that, Yeah. And to me as a kid, coming across a story by a different guy that also mentioned Cthulhu or Necronomicon gave it an eerie feeling of reality. Okay. Another thing is he was very active in the Amateur Press Association of the time, which is the equivalent of a blog, and he would mentor authors and share story ideas and help them. And so all these guys are working in this pool. He's getting them started as horror writers, and was very open and friendly in doing this. And so all that was like this huge thing that Lovecraft gave that no one ever thinks about. We just think, well, they're tentacle monsters, and there are tentacle monsters, but Robert Bloch exists in part because of Lovecraft's influence when he was in his teens.
John Edgar has a question here. He says, Sandy, do you think Chaosium will ever make a new 7th edition printing of Shadows of Yog-Sothoth?
I mean, I think it's likely. It seems like a pretty low-hanging fruit to me. So why not do it, right? All they got to do is get somebody to go through it and upgrade to 7th edition rules, and presto, you have a whole campaign people were begging for.
Well, let's hope they do then. Although who knows how they would make it. So my next question for you is, like, I know you yourself. I mean, the fact that you're on my show for starters, and that you've been in others, it indicates that you're definitely not part of the woke crowd. And we've had for the last several years, in all of the RPG, like in the bigger publishing companies, they've all to one degree or another embraced wokeness, some more than others. And going back to what I was saying before, that I think that woke is now has been in a decline for the last year, and it's accelerating. There's been a lot of criticism all of a sudden, right? Like after it kind of, well, I mean, it hit the mainstream after Elon Musk criticized the other Petersen's book on the history of D&D, where they basically crapped all over Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and said that, you know, their games were offensive and terrible and you probably shouldn't play them. But here's this book that has the original rules.
I knew Gygax and Arneson, right? I actually knew Arneson better than Gygax. Gygax I met at some conventions, but Arneson I played games with. And I mean, these were not evil racist guys. They just wanted to play fun games, you know.
And so, like, after Elon Musk said that, all of a sudden there have been like articles on like mainstream media talking about the nonsense of you know, in D&D they have like screeds about gender identity or safety tools, which by the way was something that they borrowed from BDSM play, and anti-colonialism, and, you know, orcs being good, and now orcs are Mexicans for some reason, I don't know why, but you know, all this stuff, you know, it seems like there's now a lot of pushback. And it's funny because I've been, you know, criticizing this for well over a decade now, and now all of a sudden everybody's on the bandwagon for that. So
well, I think if orcs came out of the mountains of Mexico, the Mexicans would be the very first people up there trying to shoot them down, you know, and I don't blame them. Well, here's the thing. I have noticed the some of the wokeness going away. I have also, however, noticed that some people on the right that have come out from under rocks, and I'm seeing more stuff on X that's like overtly anti-Semitic, like showing pictures of Jewish people and saying, look, they're subhuman. It's like, I mean, I don't want that either. And I'm not trying to compare to the guy. No, I'm right wing, but those guys, holy smokes, you know. But I just don't. I just want to make games. I'd be thrilled to make games without ever being canceled, because I've been canceled several times and it was not fun. And the last time they tried to get me to write this lengthy, long apology where I said I have to get better friends, and I would not do it. I just said, look, I'm going to stop posting for a while, because I posted something that was false. I was misled by a guy that said it was true and it was false, and I felt bad about that. I don't want to post false things, but apparently you can't just say I was wrong and it was false. You must grovel, and so
well, that's I think what's mostly disappearing now, right? And I think, you know, my own career is an example of how when you refuse,
so it's not gone yet.
Yeah, well, but I think my own career is an example of, like, when you refuse to do that, nothing actually happens to you, and instead you get people that are like on your side. When I started as the RPG pundit, you know, many years ago, I had a whole bunch of people who were some of them were game designers, some of them were employees at companies that would like write to me in private, you know, and they would go, yeah, you know, I totally agree with you, but I just can't say it, you know. And like for a long time, I was one of very few people that would say these things out loud. Sorry?
I'm my own publisher now. I only have to answer to me.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I've got a similar situation where you know, you make yourself independent, and then you break free of it, you know. So I think that this is something that is now starting to turn, you know.
This plays off into one of my philosophies of game design. Okay, so my philosophy in game design, which I've often had to fight for, is that it's better to make a weird cult game that a few people really like instead of a giant mass market game that everyone sort of doesn't hate. Okay, all my games are weird cult games. Okay, I mean, Doom, I guess, is mass market, but we didn't think it would be. We thought it was going to be this weird thing, right, that hardly anyone would play. And the industry thought that too. When we were walking around talking about Doom, they said, oh, no, we can't ever do a game like this. It's too extreme. So we're doing these cult games. And so I think that when I do something that is going to offend some people, I'm doing it with the knowledge that there's going to be people that are going to like it. And they're going to like it more because it's that way.
Yeah.
You know,
that's true. Well, I mean, ironically, I helped create 5th edition D&D. And the design concept there that I was working with Mike Merles on was specifically to do the opposite of that, was to create a game that was not necessarily going to be anybody's favorite game, but was going to be a game that everybody would be kind of okay with playing with. And that it was meant especially to be to do the opposite of what 3rd edition did, which was 3rd edition rewarded you if you meticulously studied all the rules and gamed the mechanics, right? And so this 5th edition is designed in such a way that if you're a casual player, like a new player or a player who just, you know, hasn't read the books meticulously, your character is going to be about as good as a guy who has, right? The guy who has might get a couple of little advantages, but it won't be that enormous gap that you see in some games where careful study of the rules is going to benefit, right? But in my own personal work, like all the RPGs that I've written myself are super niche, right? But they get, you know, they get a fandom, and that fandom loves it, you know. And that is the way to do it for sure if you're doing indie RPGs, you know. It might not be what I'd recommend to Hasbro, but it is what I'd recommend to anyone who wants to write their own RPG.
All I know is everyone's heard of Call of Cthulhu. If they played D&D any length of time, it's not played nearly as much, but the people that play it seem to really like it. So when I go to a convention, when I'm hanging out with, like when I was back in the day, I'd hang out with Dave Arneson, and he would have random guys coming up and randomly talk about their games or ignore them. And I would have some guy come to me and go into great depth about their Call of Cthulhu campaign, and they were like super obsessed. Their eyes were all crazy, you know, and that was and of course I love that.
Yeah, I love to hear every time someone tells me about some weird thing they've done with one of my games, right? That where they're not playing it like the way that the game was meant to operate originally. I love that, you know, because it's great, because that's part of the spirit of the OSR for sure. And so the idea is, yeah, make it your own. Absolutely. Yeah, what you were talking about with like right-wing, you know, what James Lindsay kind of stupidly calls the woke right, but he's got a bit of a point there. I think that started.
It does have it is kind of, I can understand what he's saying.
Yeah, yeah, and it's something that I think started with October 7th, right? Because all of a sudden you had the left, you know, a whole section of the left just took the mask off and started openly calling for the destruction of Israel, right? And then suddenly the right said, hey, now, you know, the difference being that section of the left has enormous power on the left. On the right, you have a bunch of guys that are like, you know, anti-Semites or racists or what have you, but they're very marginalized on the like institutional right. You know, like they're not the people that have influence over Donald Trump. Whereas in the left, you had members of Congress that were doing this shit, right? So it's not the same, but it does mean that all of a sudden you have these reorganizations of like lines of people, right? Because it used to be that, you know, Democrats would kind of be able to tolerate the crowd that are now calling for the destruction of Israel, for example, and Republicans would be able to ignore the kind of Nick Fuentes crowd. And now instead you have like both of those groups they found a common cause, you know. So it's what's brought them out of the woodwork.
They fall out from under their rock and say, oh, well, Trump won, so now I can say anything I want, that even though Trump doesn't agree with it, or right. But
yeah, well, it's ironic that, you know, like all of Trump's grandkids are Jewish, you know? And here they are, like,
look, there's a lot
putting on MAGA hats.
There's a lot of things I really hate about Trump. I don't like that he cheated on his wife. I don't like that he's kind of a bully. But man, I like the economy he gave us, and I like the team he's putting together. And there's a character in the Book of Mormon where it says he did justice unto the people, but not unto himself, for he was very sinful. And that's kind of how I view Trump, you know.
Yeah, well, you know, there's another.
Plus, he was amazingly courageous during the campaign. That really impressed me.
Unfortunately, I'm not a big scholar on the Book of Mormon, but there's a classic example of that also in the Old Testament itself.
Oh yeah, King David.
King David, exactly, right. He was
a
man after God's own heart, but he was individually, as a person, as a human being, he was a big screw up. But
a great king,
because he was oriented towards what was right, you know, and because he loved the Lord. He was, you know, always, you know, the God always kind of like, you know, gave him a break eventually, you know. So that's a very important feature, you know.
Anyway, I think I can have problems with Trump yet still vote for him and, you know, be right wing without, I don't have to walk in lockstep with everything he does, which I think some people on the left field, they have to walk in lockstep with all the positions, you know. And I don't feel that way on the right. I can have positions that are out of sync with some of them. You know, I can say, I love Ukraine. I think we should support them without feeling that now I must be thrown out of the club. You know.
Well, Trump doesn't want Ukraine to be taken over by.
No, I agree.
I don't think anyone.
There are guys online saying, "Oh, we shouldn't give any money to Ukraine." We have had such great intelligence rewards from Ukraine, as you probably know. You know, they've been sending us copies of all the Russian radar and target acquisition. We know everything about the Chinese.
Yeah, that is true. And I think that was part of the motivation of the American military-industrial complex to do it. But I think that the problem is that the Ukraine was set up in the sense of how the Western powers supported Ukraine to make it into a forever war, right? Well, I don't think that's there was very early. Hang on. Very early in that war, there was a proposal for a truce that was being put together, that was essentially going to give the Donbass and Crimea to Russia, and then the Ukraine would be left independent. Except apparently, according to legend, Boris Johnson kiboshed that.
To be fair,
and now years later,
over the Crimea, and Russia turned on him. You know, it's not like you trust Russia to not attack them again. But
the problem is that now it's like years later, right? And hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have died, and the peace deal that's going to get made under Trump is probably going to be the exact same thing.
Might be the same one.
Because that's the only logical peace you can end up achieving.
But if it's the same one, except now Ukraine's in NATO, then Russia can't attack them again.
Yeah, I don't think Ukraine's going to go into NATO.
If they don't go into NATO, they can't agree to giving up their stuff, because they're just going to be.
I think they're going to get assurances that who knows how good they are, but
we know how good they are. You know what Russia did with the assurances.
I think that as long as
anyway, my point is just that I'm not in sync with every single Republican, and that's okay.
Yeah,
I can be my own man.
Of course. And nowadays,
it's not going to matter when price is up.
Because the left has marginalized itself so much, the right is now an enormous camp. I mean, you've got everything from J.D. Vance to Bobby Kennedy on the right, So
I know, right?
That is an enormous spectrum of ideas.
I guess the Democrats won because we got Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard and Elon Musk. They're all former Democrats,
Trump is
exiled by their side, so okay. Yeah. But anyway,
it's absolutely true.
Off politics. What do we have left?
Well, we have here a question from Brendan Davis. He says, have you talked about, he has not yet talked about this, Brendan, how you were involved in Pirates, which he apparently really loved.
So when I came to Microprose Software, there was my very first job was to take Sid Meier's Pirates game, which was on the Apple IIgs or some god-awful system, and to put it into the Macintosh. So the whole game had to be changed from having a controller and stuff to having a mouse with a single button. And so I didn't change the way the game worked, but I had to change how I had to take this very different control system and make sure it felt like Pirates for the sword combat, for the land combat, for the sea combat, and all that had to work. And that was my very first task. So that was my participation. But I was trying to reverse engineer everything so it felt like the game did on the other systems, the Commodore.
We've got here a $10 super chat from Quentin Bauer. I don't know if you're familiar with Quentin, but he wrote an RPG called Raiders of Riley, which I was a consultant on. I consulted there mainly for like the early. It's basically a Cthulhu game, an RPG. That is set in 1910, so it's slightly earlier than Call of Cthulhu.
Well, I'm going to assume that Quentin Bauer is praising me for the ElfQuest role-playing game, so you're welcome, Quentin.
Is he? Okay. I'm pretty sure. Well, I know that without Call of Cthulhu, there wouldn't have been a Raiders of Riley, and it is, by the way, a very good product, and so are the supplements for it. But thank you, Quentin, for the $10 super chat.
Oh, So ElfQuest, of course, is based on Richard and Wendy Peeney's ElfQuest comics, which I had to read before we did the game. But one of the fun things is, so we met with Richard and Wendy talking about it. And Wendy is like the artist and the driver. Richard is kind of like the business guy. And so we're explaining to her how role-playing works. She'd never heard of it. And she's like, wait, you mean people can play Cutter or Skywise in the game? And we said, well, yeah, that's, or meet them. Yeah, that's the point. Oh, I can't have that. What if they change the story? Well, that's kind of the point. But the thing is, Richard understood, and he said, don't worry, when he was trying to calm her down, like, it's okay to change the rules. So, that was a fun experience with someone that knew nothing about role playing, being worried about her vision being destroyed. So
just so everyone knows, we've got about 100 people watching right now, which is very nice. And I'm going to open the floor here for any questions that anyone might have for Sandy, because I've gotten through all the questions except the last question that I always ask in the Pundit Encounter. So if someone has something to ask Sandy, this is your opportunity. Someone's got a question for Quentin Bauer if he's going to do a Carnegie book.
Look,
we'll give him a couple of minutes if people are typing up any questions.
And one of Lovecraft's favorite authors. Lovecraft's favorite novel was House on the Borderland by William Hope Hodgson.
Yes, please do hit the like button, guys, and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And after we're done, share this live stream anywhere you can.
Well, if they don't have questions, I have questions for them.
Okay.
If I was to put together some kind of live stream on my YouTube channel, would it be interesting to do a game where I show how I design a game, or where you show me playing my hyperspace role-playing game, or I do a master class in design? Maybe someone provides me with the game they're working on and I critique it. Which of those things would be appealing?
I'm guessing all of those would be very appealing.
I want to see what these people say.
Yeah, let's see.
Like
So, meanwhile, favorite Lovecraft story?
My favorite Lovecraft story? Yeah. The first one I ever read was the Pickman's Model. So that's always had a big impact. But the one that affected Call of Cthulhu the most is the Dunwich Horror. The Dunwich Horror is absolutely a Call of Cthulhu adventure from start to finish.
Yeah, that's a good one. Another question for you. Why do you look so young?
I'm 69 years old. I look so young because of clean living. and the love of a good woman.
There you go. That's good.
Um,
Yeah, I guess no smoking tobacco for you, right?
No smoking, no liquor, no coffee, no tea.
No coffee. My God. Well, you see, this is why, you know, like they say that when
hey, mine is a harsh religion.
that when the Prince of Kiev was trying to figure out what religion to convert to,
I love
he
that story.
considered Islam until he heard that you couldn't
No
drink
food.
or eat
Yeah.
pork.
Yeah.
That's why I'm never going to be a Mormon.
Yeah, he liked Islam a lot. And my understanding is that he didn't want to be Catholic because then he had to work with the Pope. He didn't want to be Jewish because there was those horse archers that lived over near Georgia that were enemies of his that were Jewish, which is one of the weirdest things history ever had. Jewish horse archers, right? But Orthodox Saint Cyril gave him an alphabet so he could write his language in, and that's won him over. So it's like
it looks like the answers are overwhelmingly yes to all of those. You know, absolutely yes, absolutely yes. More of that. Yes, all. That all sounds interesting. MLF has a question for you. What's your favorite video game right now?
My favorite video game right now? You know, I just recently got into Guild Wars 2 and thought it was pretty good. I know it's been around a long time, but it's the first I've encountered it. So, you know, there's that.
Brendan Davis says the masterclass sounds great. And Brendan is a game designer himself. So
there we go.
Yeah. Love to hear about the back end. Yeah, I have different sets of playlists on my channel, and one of them is they taught you D&D wrong on purpose is the name of the playlist, and it often talks about like in those videos I talk about the principles of game design, and those tend to be pretty popular. Not as popular as when I'm bitching about Wizards of the Coast, but still pretty popular.
Well, you know, Wizards of the Coast is a company with a lot of guys, and everyone has to. One of the problems with having a company with a bunch of managers is that every level of manager has to meddle with the product, or else they feel that they are unneeded. And since fundamentally they are unneeded, this leads to all this meddling. And on those layers, you're going to get someone who doesn't know anything about games, but he wants to meddle, and so he's like, oh, this Palestinian stuff, that's really hot now. I should mention that in the game. I think that's where some of that's talking about. I don't think it's an organized plan by a bunch of evil people at the top of I mean, it might be, but I think it's like these random middle managers like throwing in their oars on everything. And
the real problem now with
their existence, you know.
The real problem now with Wizards is that there's basically everyone doesn't know about games there, right? Like all of the people who were really important game designers are gone, right? Like, you know, Mike Merles is gone, Ray Winninger is gone, all of the old TSR people are gone, obviously, for a long time now, and you're left with like dregs of people. And then there's been like a bunch of nepotistic hiring, right? Like they hired some people on the basis of largely, you know, DEI reasons, and then those people hired people that never played D&D. There's a bunch of people that wrote some of the recent adventures would literally never play D&D. They were friends of one of these guys who were basically writers of like young adult novels or vegan cookbooks, and they put them in charge of like major books, you know, which then flop. It's nuts. Here's a question: have you looked at any of the catalog from Free League games?
Nope. When I'm playing role-playing or board games, I mostly play my own because I'm testing them. I do play other board games sometimes. I pretty much never play other role-playing games because my role-playing games are all my house rules, so why not just play them?
Makes sense.
It's Free League. I don't know if Free League is role-playing or...
Role-playing.
Is role-playing, yeah. So I never play other people's role-playing games. Not because I don't like them. I used to play other people's role-playing games, but now that I have my own, like... I have RuneQuest, which I worked on. I don't play ElfQuest, but I could. I have Call of Cthulhu. I got Hyperspace. I would play those. So maybe that's bad. Also, the problem is when I play a computer game, or sorry, a board game, I can pull out a game like Feast of Odin and play that in an evening, and I'm done. But if I want to get the full feel of a role-playing game, it's months of commitment.
Campaign. Yeah.
I don't, right? So I don't want, like, why would I want to do that with, anyway, it's harder to play more role-playing games. Why do I think?
I don't know if this question is even correct or not because I don't play computer games. But why do you think computer adaptations?
So far, they've mostly failed, and I think the reason they fail is actually because, and it's a simpler reason than you might think. It's because most computer adaptations of everything fail, and there's not very many adaptations of Lovecraft, so there simply hasn't been enough for us to get a good one. Sturgeon's Law, 90% of everything is shit, right?
Yeah. Richard Kuntz came in late. Richard, I'm just going to answer this for you. You're going to have to watch the beginning of the live stream because we did talk about what...
the answer is yes, by the way. Yes. Yeah. Doing it right now.
Yeah, the answer is yes, and you'll get the details when you rewatch the start of things.
I have a strategy game right now, which I haven't mentioned up now, called Death Dealer, in which you literally design your own faction as you play, your own asymmetrical faction. So that's something that's new.
And this is a question that I'm going to answer. I'm a fan of alchemy, but I have not seen any game come out with rules that actually resembled medieval alchemy since Judges Guild. Lion and Dragon, it's D&D based, but the magic system is completely different, and the magic system is based on what real magicians of the Middle Ages thought things worked as, and one of the things you can learn as a character is alchemy. Okay, and it's the alchemical formulas all come from medieval sources.
But is it based on the super arcane, weird medieval alchemy stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
all of the magic is based on magic that was actually practiced at some point in the medieval ages.
Well, there's Res Arcana and Alchemists, which are board games, which have elements in that regard. And then there's my own published game, which I did not design, called Potions and Profits, in which you play for a giant, heartless multinational company that makes magic potions.
But mine is like, it's got the Philosopher's Stone, the elixir of life, the whole deal, right? And it makes a difference between puffery and high alchemy, true alchemy.
Cool.
Anyway, let's see here. What else have we got? Yeah, people love a good rant. Yeah, that my best videos are like the ones that get the most views are always when I'm ranting about something. That's just a product of YouTube, I think. It's the nature of what people like to watch. Is this the Sandy Petersen who made both Call of Cthulhu and Age of Empires? It is.
And Doom.
And Doom.
And Cthulhu Wars. Yeah, I did a lot.
Let's see if there's any other questions here. Thank you both. Thank you. Let's see here. Doom or Quake in regards to the experience of working on the True projects, which was your favorite?
Okay, so Doom hands down. Okay, Quake was a horrible death march that when it literally killed id Software. At the end of Quake, I left, Sean Green left, John Romero left, Michael Abrash left, Dave Taylor left, and eventually Adrian Carmack left. And that gutted id Software. It was never the same. And it's because of Doom, of Quake. So it just destroyed. That was the end of the old id. And that's why everything they did after Quake was like not the same.
All right. Sorry, I was answering a question there.
Okay, wait. Someone just said, I got to say this. Someone just said there was that computer game set in medieval Germany from many years ago, which is heavy in alchemy. That game was Darklands, and I was one of the guys on that game.
Oh, there you go.
So we totally had alchemy, but I will not claim that it was super authentic.
All right. So it seems like we're winding down here. So I guess I can move into the. Well, hang on. One more question here. How much of your success, Sandy, do you attribute to being on the ground floor entry of two burgeoning industries of RPGs and computer games?
I can only say that there was other guys in on the ground floors of those who have not had my success. So I'm sure that played into it. But designing Call of Cthulhu you know, and all the levels of Doom, I think has I mean, I don't want to sit there and say that I'm this greatest designer that ever lived, but I think there is not many designers who have had a big success in computer games and in tabletop board games and in role-playing games.
For sure.
If I ever did card games, then I would have like the quadrifecta of all types of games.
Yeah, really.
But I have really spread success, award-winning success over a lot of things. So, I mean, was I in the right place at the right time? I think I was, but I also had to do something besides just being there, because there was other guys that were there.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you have the talent and you're at the right place at the right time, then that is obviously going to be a big advantage. But if you still have to have the talent, right? There were, remember that in the late 70s and early 80s, there were tons of people who made RPGs, and a lot of them didn't go anywhere, right? And same thing with computer games.
Sure, there was the infamous Spawn of Fashan. I don't know if you ever saw that thing. That was hilarious. Yeah. That was like the you've seen Tommy Wiseau's The Room, the terrible movie, or Troll 2. Shaun of Fashan was like the amazingly bad fun movie to watch of role-playing games.
Yeah, but I mean, even that at least is remembered as just for how awful it was. But there are like hundreds, if not thousands, of games that you know had sometimes been called fantasy heartbreakers.
Yeah, that didn't go anywhere. You know,
yeah, that were a lot of them were just basically D&D with some house rule that someone thought was going to be like their ticket to like infinite hookers and blow, and it just wasn't going to be, you know.
Yeah, or there was like Other Suns, which took the RuneQuest system and put it in space, and there was Boot Hill, which I played a campaign of. You know, that was my TSR. There's all these different things that what did I mention? The World of Cinnabar. Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting world. And so,
but like an unbelievably bad game.
it's cheap to keep a game like that going, a role-playing game going, you know. But so I think there was a lot of them that never went anywhere. And Call of Cthulhu, I think the thing that made Call of Cthulhu last was that was the contrarian thing, because other people saw Call of Cthulhu after it came out. It was the first horror game, right, and also the first Lovecraft game. And they said, I mean, obviously D&D has horror elements, but it's not a horror game.
Yeah.
They say, we can do a horror game and do it better than Call of Cthulhu because we'll be more positive. So there was Chill and there was all these other games, but they all did the same exact style of other role-playing games, which is kill the monster, get better, kill the monster, get better, which, like I said, is a compelling, awesome system. But if you play Chill and you do that, why not just like play D&D and do that? You know, whereas Call of Cthulhu was actually it was different. You were playing something different.
So Edgelord here says horror on the Orient Express or Masks. I know that I would say Massive Nyarlathotep, but
I have not played horror on the Orient Express, though I own a copy, so I cannot speak to it. But I love Masks.
Yeah. So this has brought me to one more question I've just come up with before we.
Is this your last question thing?
Well, this is the second to last question, because I've just I don't know why I didn't even think of asking this until now, but so Call of Cthulhu was relatively very niche before, like, I mean the story, the Lovecraft stories were very niche before the COC game came out, and in many ways Call of Cthulhu the game is what brought the Lovecraft mythos back into popular culture, right? And for even then, for a while, it was quite niche to, like, you know, nerds basically. And there was, you know, there were a few movies and stuff, you know, Into the Mouth of Madness.
There was not. Like no, that was way later. That was 20 years after Call of Cthulhu. Look, see this? This exists because of my game.
Right. Well, that's actually what I want to talk to you about, because this is the thing. In the 80s, Call of Cthulhu was novel, basically, to a whole generation.
And so many people have never
now
heard of
we've gone to the point that there are, you know, Cthulhu plushies, and it's turned into this cutesy poo thing, and it's become very kind of mainstreamed in some ways, certainly in geek culture at least, but geek culture itself has become mainstreamed. And do you think that to some degree that means that Cthulhu as a genre is becoming a victim of its own success, right? Like, once I'm waiting for there to be like a Cthulhu Babies animated show for kids, you know, and then that cheapens it, you know. Sorry, go ahead.
Lots of crappy games and kitschy stuff in the Lovecraft. Well, of course there are. because it's popular. But that doesn't mean the original stuff isn't still good. Think of all the terrible Batman stuff, but there's still some good Batmans. The other thing is, I'm proud of the fact I have an award for greatness in Lovecraft by the Providence Lovecraft Society, and they said that the reason Lovecraft is famous today, I got this in the early 2000s, is because Call of Cthulhu came out in 1981, and it started making its way through the RPG culture, and then in 1985. Reanimator comes out, and that starts going through the film geek culture, and the combination of these two things in different parts of pop society made Lovecraft well known. And I agree with that. This Stuart Gordon was the other guy that did it, but I did it first, and so I'm willing to take credit for the Cthulhu plushies, or
no doubt,
or to take the responsibility if you don't like them.
I do think that in some ways Cthulhu, some of the elements of the mythos at least have ended up infiltrating into other areas of horror. It's changed the horror genre in a very big way.
Well, it had already changed horror in a sense, because even in the 80s and 90s, everyone that wrote horror, they were positioning themselves either to imitate Lovecraft or to react against Lovecraft's ideas.
Yeah.
Either way, they're being influenced by him, though.
Do you think though that what might that in some ways there might be now that exact thing, the reaction to make something that is different from Cthulhu, because of just how pervasive the Cthulhu genre has become, like as in it's now become the old hat,
Well, look, let's say that you're an atheist who hates religion. What do modern atheists do? They talk about how there wasn't a Jesus, how the Pope is evil and a bunch of child molesters, and how Mormons are crazy gun-toting FBI agents. But everything they do is oriented towards Christianity because that's the religion they know. So they're actually positioning themselves as a Christian worldview. And I think that's what happens when you go away from Lovecraft. I love the idea of doing non-Lovecraftian movies and stuff. I just think that they're still being influenced by him. And to be fair, what is Lovecraftian? Lovecraft wrote stories about cannibalism. Hell, the guy wrote a story about a man that had sex with a gorilla. Okay,
true.
He wrote lots of things. So you can't really categorize. Lovecraftian has a specific meaning, but not all Lovecraft stories are Lovecraftian. Yeah,
that's true. But anyway, it's interesting to see how that's going to keep evolving over time.
Some guys here are saying it. So many people tell me they heard about Lovecraft or read Lovecraft because of my game. So I am very proud of that.
My first exposure to the Lovecraft mythos was Call of Cthulhu, the game. Yeah.
When I wrote Call of Cthulhu, every single person, the role-play game, every single person I knew personally who had heard about Lovecraft had heard about them because I had told them. That's how obscure it was.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So it's time for my final question. I asked the same question of everyone, but I get the feeling that you are not going to get the prize for this one, because we have a contest going on with all of the guests that have come over the last, the previous 4 episodes, and now you're contestant number 5. The current reigning champion is still Driving in Dragons, and the question is this. So first, I got to give you the setup, right? That I'm kind of a very weird RPG gamer, because I don't engage with almost any other aspect of nerd culture, right? I don't read animes. I read comic books as a kid, but I don't read comic books today.
Hey, we're on the same page. I don't watch animes. I haven't read comics since I was a kid.
I don't play video games. I'm sorry, I've never played any of your video games because I don't play any. The last video games I played was like Tetris, I think.
Hey, Doom is a great horror game.
I'm sure it is, but I don't play video games. I don't read like Star Trek or Star Wars novels or any serialized sci-fi or fantasy novels. In fact, I largely don't read novels at all. I don't collect plushies or what are they called, Funko Pops or miniatures for that matter. I play theater of the mind, I guess is what they call it these days. And so like basically the only really nerdy thing that I do, I mean, I have other weird interests, obviously, right? Like the study of world religions and mythology and stuff like that. And I do play other games, but I don't play, like, for example, weird German board games that take 6 hours to play, or most of the kind of like board games made specifically for geeks or stuff like that. I play, I play stuff like dominoes, and 5-card stud, so essentially, D&D is the only really nerd culture thing I do. And so the question is, how much of a nerd are you? What are the things that you do apart from RPGs? Obviously, you also do computer games, clearly.
I do computer games. I play more tabletop board games than computer games. I watch a lot of horror movies and action movies. I like war movies. I mean, I got my start in the hobby.
Hang on, war movies and action movies that do not count as nerd stuff because they're mainstream culture. In fact, I would almost argue that like watching Marvel movies is still mainstream.
Have you seen Admiral Roaring Currents, which is a Korean naval movie about Admiral Yi Sun-sin? Have you seen T-34, which is a Russian movie about guys in a T-34? Those are pretty obscure war movies, and that's kind of.
Did you know that they did a very lengthy TV series I think it was in the 90s of Yi Sun-shin in Korean television that was just spectacular. Actually, I've watched the whole thing.
I would love to see it, but the movies that anyway. So I got my start playing war games, Avalon Hill war games in the 60s, because that was the only complicated game you could get, and I loved those. So I play those. I read a lot of history. I do read science fiction, and I've read all the Honor Harrington books. I read Larry Correa's Monster Hunter books. I'm currently into his fantasy series, which I could be a long time to get into because I'm kind of reluctant to read fantasy because usually it's also terrible. So I'm not sure if I'm the nerdiest guy. I mean, I like playing with my grandkids. I like monster movies. I like action movies. That's not really nerdy, like you said.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're right about in the middle score.
I watch so many foreign movies that I have to get a special all-region DVD player so I can see, Korean horror or heck, Indonesian action. So does that count as nerdy? I'm not sure.
I don't think so. It is a weird hobby, but it isn't really part of mainstream nerd culture. Anime is, obviously, but
oh yeah, okay. I'm weird, but I may not be mainstream. And look, my idea of anime is My Neighbor Totoro, right? So when I want to go watch a cartoon, I'm going to watch something like the French-Czech Fantastic Planet, made in 1967. That was wild. You ever see that one?
I haven't.
Oh, you got to check it out. It'll blow your mind. It's crazy.
There was a time when the French made really good comics and animated series, and it was largely that era.
Could well be, Well, this is a combined French. It was during the Czech springtime before, like, they got cracked down on by the evils of Brezhnev. But it's a really cool. The human. It's on this alien planet. It's super alien. Humans are there's these huge creatures. Okay, that are kind of humanoid, and there's one of them who's a little girl, but she's like 100 feet tall, and she keeps a human as a pet. And humans are like pets, and you see them going exterminating the humans when they get too many of them. And anyway, Fantastic Planet, check it out.
There we go. All right, so it seems like Driving and Dragons is still our reigning champion for the least nerdy guest that I've had, but you're not the most nerdy guest that we've had. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, I'm too old to be super nerdy, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess there's probably a few things that have become part of nerd culture long after you started in nerd culture, so that happens to all of us. But all right. So thank you very much for having been here. And to everybody watching, please, again, subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Hit like on the video to help it, get through the algorithm. And check out in the link. There's a link there, or rather in the description of this video. There's a link to Sandy's YouTube channel if you haven't joined it yet.
Also, I do have a video on there.
Doing some live streams.
I have a video on it called "Horror Movies You Haven't Heard of," where I have like 45 minutes of rambling about horror movies that.
Well, that's probably an expert class right there. So there you go, guys. You need to check that out. And check out, there's links there to all of my products, all my OSR games, and to the Red Room store, and to well, Baptism of Fire and everything else I've been doing. 101 Sarmatians is coming out sometime soon, probably this month. It's been fast-tracked incredibly by Drive-Thru RPG, so stay tuned for that. That's the source book for Baptism of Fire on the Polish aristocracy, and full of intrigues and all sorts of exciting stuff. Oh, $20 super chat from No One of Consequence. Get another kitten. Well, here's the last view of Domino. She's kind of sleepy right now.
Well, I think you can keep a single cat. Now, I had ferrets for a while. You have to have 2 ferrets.
Yeah. Well, with cats, the thing is, if you live alone and you go out to work every day,
well, yeah, you might need a cat for that.
But because I work from home, I'm here. Most of the time I'll be here, right? So then it's okay to have one cat, because as long as you're providing the companionship for the cat. And of course, because of, as I mentioned in her origin story, she was basically a throwaway cat that somebody had rescued, and so she's been largely, she's only 2 months old, but she was basically raised around people rather than cats. So she like instantly just got accustomed to the house, and to now she spends most of her time napping on my lap. So it's a pretty good match, I think, for the type of housebound laziness that I have also.
My best friend in high school was Bucky, my cat. So I mean, I had other friends. I wasn't a total loner or anything. I was like the weird guy that read Lovecraft and had friends that were also weird. I was not like a jock or anything.
Yeah. All right. So, this was a great interview, and maybe we'll have you back again sometime, though it probably won't be anytime too soon, because I only do one of these shows every 4 weeks, and we've got a list of people. And as I said,
back to me.
If this is the first time you've watched the RPG Pundit Encounter, if you look back at the previous episodes, you'll see that I alternate between trying to get people that are really well known in the hobby, and people that are relatively new to the hobby, or that are, that they've got a YouTube channel, or they've just started publishing something. And so probably my next show will be somebody who is an up and comer, a new person, to give them some coverage, and
which category am I in?
Pardon me?
Which category am I in?
Well, you're at this point, you've replaced Alex Macris as the most famous guy I've had on here yet. So you're number 1 on that list. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
It's hard to get some of the, well, apart from the fact that a lot of the older guys aren't really into YouTube. It's hard to get some of them because again, that fear of the reputation of dealing with a guy who's as notoriously anti-woke as I am, So I appreciate you coming here. That's a good example to make to your fellows. If you know other game designers that you think would like to be on, and just tell them not to be scared. There's nothing to worry about anymore. All right. Okay. So thank you, everyone, and we will be back in 4 weeks. So that is going to be on probably the 2nd of February, I guess. So stay tuned. I'll let you guys know who's going to be on it. When I decide. Okay.
Okay.
Any last words, Sandy?
No more words of wisdom. Look for me on X and YouTube, and Hyperspace will be coming out soon. And you can be a crazy alien ex-girlfriend monster or something. So. All
right, guys. Take care. Currently smoking. This is Lorenzetti Poker plus Argento Roots.